Well, ladies and gentlemen, Trump said he'd invade Iran, and he didn't. No bombing, no invasion, no nothing. In fact, the actual escalation between the tensions of the two have cooled down to the point where it may look like, well, the entire thing is being called off. But before we get on to the main news stories of today and some breaking South African news, please do consider subscribing to the channel and helping me grow to 200,000 subscribers. Your support is much welcomed. In any case, let's get on to the first news story, and this is around Iran. As you'll know, national protests erupted across Iran against the ruling clerical regime. Now, the protests were driven by political repression, economic hardship, and long-standing grievances against the mullahs. Now, Iranian security forces responded with mass arrests, use of lethal force in some areas, and widespread intimidation. Now, NGOs and opposition sources claim that thousands of protesters were killed. Iranian authorities denied or dispute death tolls. They say it's nowhere near what these people are saying. And Iran implemented internet shutdown to prevent images and videos leaving the country, which is part of the reason that nobody actually knows how many individuals have been killed. Now, satellite internet equipment, specifically Starlink, was reportedly targeted by the Iranian authorities. So Starlink did deploy in that region to boost the internet, but the news came out that it was being blocked. Now, the Iranian judiciary threatened mass executions of protesters, and Iranian officials later announced that executions would be halted or postponed. No executions would occur today or tomorrow, they announced. This led many individuals to note that one of the main reasons Trump said that he was going to bomb Iran was the executions. And so now the question is, as the executions have been stayed off, will Trump roll back the threat of bombing Iran or going to war with Iran? And it actually looked like the answer was yes. Trump actually said positively he understands no executions will take place. And so it looked like the escalations were cooling. Now, Iranian officials framed the unrest as foreign interference, specifically saying that the unrest, the protests, were prompted by Israel and America, and they blamed external destabilization efforts of the Iranian government. Now, at the time of recording, protests appeared to have subsided following security crackdowns. Fear of death. It's important to understand that many individuals in Iran are saying they're scared to go out and protest because they will be shot. And information suppression, because many of the individuals are worried that they'll disappear and there's no way for anybody to know who disappeared or who was targeted. So what actually happened yesterday? Well, it appeared yesterday that Donald Trump had the intentions of bombing Iran. This after they closed the airspace, they were withdrawing troops, and important security personnel from Qatar. Flights to and around Tel Aviv were cancelled, and the tensions in the area seemed at an all-time high. So it seemed like that was when it was going to occur. And would you know it, nothing happened. And as of today, it would appear that the closed airspaces have now reopened. So Iran has now vowed that it will defend any threat against itself. Well, this after the threat seems to have gone away. But it was that threat of targeting U.S. interests in the Middle East that appears to have stayed off Trump's action. Now, Iran engaged in diplomatic outreach to regional actors, which included Saudi Arabia, because they're trying to get some form of solidarity with the fellow Arab states. They also engaged the UN Security Council, who supposedly were scheduling an emergency discussion on Iran. Now, in terms of the US, and specifically Donald Trump, well, Donald Trump told intermediaries, it's important to understand, he told intermediaries. This actually hasn't come out from him directly to the press, but by intermediaries, we're actually talking about ministers in Iran who then told Al-Jamah and various other entities that he was not planning an immediate attack on Iran. So apparently he told them he had no intention of attacking them, and they told everybody else this, but he's not told that to us. In any case, the US military repositioned assets and troops in the Middle East. We saw that occurring in real time, and the US has now returned its forces to the Qatari airbase, which does give some kind of credence to the fact that maybe he's not going to attack because he removed his personnel to stop there being reprisals from the attack, and now he sent them back. So maybe he's not going to attack. Now, Trump publicly said that he would watch and see regarding Iran's actions. And Gulf states, specifically Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Oman, have all urged the US to avoid military escalation, warning that a war with Iran would destabilize the region. Now, you may look at all of that and say, well, has Trump missed an opportunity? Has Trump chickened out? And this has been the suggestion from some. In fact, in the Western media, many individuals are saying just that. Trump chickened out. But in another news article, it had been suggested by an analyst that the entire operation done by Trump last night was this master miracle plan, because what it effectively did is it shifted Iran into a defensive position, whereby Iran had to roll out forms of its military readiness. And this itself provided intelligence insight into Iran, so that now they know effectively, were they actually to strike Iran, what would they do? Because they've seen it in real time. Now, if that theory is correct, those same analysts are suggesting that Trump now has days in order to actually execute his plan, because in those days, Iran will revise its defensive position, so it will be something different. Now, many individuals are wondering why this issue is so important, and it really comes down to terrorist-linked funding. You have to remember that Iran funds the majority of the terrorist regimes around the world. Hamas, Houthis, Hezbollah, the Muslim Brotherhood. Many of these entities around the world that are engaging in governmental destabilization, in really crazy kind of reverse politics going on in the Western hemispheres, are all being funded by Iran. So if Iran has their financial networks disrupted, this itself will have catastrophic impacts on those Iranian-backed militant groups. This could also mean that even in South Africa, the ANC, if it's true that they're being funded by Iran, could find its own funding disrupted. Now, if the Shah comes back to Iran, you've got to understand that there'll probably be some form of truth and reconciliation. That could mean that all these entities that have been engaged in Western sabotage, all of their activities will come to the forefront. We'll all know about them. And that in itself is exactly why this entire topic should be exciting. Now, very interestingly, a pastor Dumasami, Washington, issued a public statement addressed to young people, in which he said that the Iranian government is actually guilty of all the crimes they accuse Israel of. He claimed that actions by Iran include mass killing of its own citizens, brutal repression by religious authorities, and highlighted that tens of thousands of Iranians have been killed. He said, but there have been no major Western campus protests on their behalf, and he contrasted the silence on Iranian repression with high-profile protests going against Israel. And he asserts that many Iranians want peace, they want freedom, and that ultimately what these individuals should be doing is recognizing the threat posed by Iran. And that's important. We should all recognize the threat that Iran poses. But before we move on, I really still have to ask the question, which we all really want to know. Is Trump chickening out, or is this masterful tactical approach just a prelude to strikes? Let me know what you think in the comments.
There are a lot of headlines out there that are, in my view, not accurate. President Trump's resolve is not the question. The question is, when we do an operation like this, should it be bigger or smaller? I'm in the camp of bigger. Time will tell. I'm hopeful and optimistic that the regime days are numbered.
So moving on then to some South African news. And the first news article is around President Cyril Ramaphosa, who publicly warned the ANC that the ANC had failed to meet the basic needs of many South Africans. Now, his speech was delivered in the Northwest Province to a half-empty stadium with a capacity of 20,000. So they only had 10,000 people even go listen to the president. I mean, this is a record low. Now, Ramaphosa linked key failures in South Africa to dysfunctional municipalities, lack of basic services, and chronic unemployment and rampant crime. And he acknowledged that government failures have demoralized communities and that citizens are questioning democracy and the ANC itself. Now, you've got to remember that the ANC lost its national majority in the 2024 elections, and the ANC now governs in coalitions, and opinion polls are suggesting that the ANC is going to lose control over all the major cities, including Johannesburg, come the next municipal elections, and we can only but pray. In any case, ANC leaders have been heckled and confronted by residents over service delivery, making the whole canvassing for the ANC almost impossible because wherever they go, they are targeted as being pariahs. Now, this has also led to internal tensions, which have been highlighted by individuals such as Gwede Matashe, who blamed the unemployment crisis on youth being lazy. Now, yet again, Ramaphosa came out with the usual tropes. The ANC must either renew itself or perish. And Ramaphosa cited limited positives, such as load shedding largely being ended, and a 54 billion rand plan for existing water infrastructure, and improvements to freight rail. I mean, I don't really see how you can go to a half-empty stadium in the northwest and talk about load shedding, water infrastructure, and freight rail, and everyone's going to be like, yay, ANC great. In any case, Ramaphosa claimed that the economy was approaching a turning point after years of low growth, and so there would in the future somehow be this mythical economic boom, and these individuals might actually get jobs. I mean, it's a bit like saying that in the future we're going to discover a three-headed pony with unicorn antlers on them, and don't worry, that means that these same unicorns are going to shit gold. I mean, okay, cool. Nice story, bro, but what exactly does this mean to the Republic? And the answer is, well, nothing. But I'll tell you another story that really also means nothing to South Africa, and that is the NHI. Because the Finance Minister, Idon Gonagona, has now stated that the legal challenges will delay NHI implementation. And I got to be honest and say that was the whole point of the legal challenges. Nobody wants the NHI. Now, he called for a truce between stakeholders. He said that there should be a negotiated settlement to move forward the NHI. Now, I hear what you're saying. You're probably going to be like, but we don't want to move it forward. Now, he noted that the NHI faces multiple court challenges, the first being the alleged unconstitutionality, the restriction of private medical schemes, lack of public consultation, corruption, and government risks. Now, he says that Treasury has raised concerns about the absence of a funding plan. He says that no money bill has been published for the NHI funding, although you must remember that the health minister moron suggested scrapping the medical aid tax credits, and that these tax credits, which amount to around 34 billion rand annually, would be put towards the NHI. Now, Godongwana previously said that removing the credits would harm the middle class, and he estimated that the NHI will cost South Africa around 900 billion to 1.3 trillion rand a year. Now, the current health budget is far below the required estimates. And so that is why the NHI itself is being challenged because of the absence of a funding plan. Now, the court proceedings scheduled include constitutional court hearings and a Gauteng High Court consolidation hearing. Now, private healthcare groups state that they all support universal healthcare and that they oppose the exclusion of the private sector participation, and that's their main objection. So, Godongwana says, you largely support universal healthcare. What should now occur is that the Minister Moron should meet with the private sector and kind of come up with a compromise. But I'm reminded that this compromise has been in the works since the NHI was first proposed. Many of the original consultations included many of these objections and forms of negotiated concessions, but the government, in its typical communist fashion, said no. Futak, we want it our way, we want full control, we want the fund that only we control, and the rest of you can go to hell. And that is why we have this mess. Now, because of government interference with the economy and the complete mess and failures that they have, British American Tobacco has now announced that they will stop manufacturing cigarettes in South Africa. BAT are going to close this factory, which will affect around 230 jobs. Now, BAT are going to shift to an import-based cigarette supply company only. Now, BAT cited, and this is important, the reason they are leaving South Africa is the illicit cigarette trade. in South Africa. They said that illicit cigarettes make up 75% of the South African market, and their factory is reportedly only operating at 35% capacity. Now, they blamed weak law enforcement, COVID-era tobacco sales bans, which they described as being completely stupid and balmy, completely arbitrary, and they said that high excess taxes are widening price gaps between illicit cigarettes and legal cigarettes. Now, COSATU has warned that job losses are a major concern. They're always a major concern to COSATU because they're losing members. And they said that enforcement against illicit trade must improve. Now, I'm reminded that in the South African state, they cannot enforce any law, no matter how good you put them there. This is the same state that wants to remove yours and my ability to own a firearm for the purpose of self-defense, because we must allow the state to be the final arbitrator of all forms of signs of dominance, all forms of law enforcement. But they can't. They can't enforce the law. To the point where even a company as powerful, as big, and as old as British American Tobacco are saying they're leaving the country because the state are unable to stop the illicit cigarette trade. And that itself is an indictment on the state as a whole. At least that's my opinions. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. And until next time, bye.